We've been talking about the stretch run for a while now for Pitt, about the final however many games, but this is really the stretch run now. 8 games left to go coming out of an off week. Starts tonight at Virginia. Huge run of 8 games. Big one tonight for sure. We're going to get ready for this stretch run. What does Pitt need to do over the next 8 games? What does tonight's game mean for the Panthers? What are some of the other games you need to be keeping an eye on this week? Spoiler alert, one of them happened last night, and it didn't go the way you needed it to go or would have liked to have seen it go. We'll talk about that for sure. Lots of basketball talk, getting ready for a huge Pitt game tonight, right here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, welcome to the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com with you as always, right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know what the deal is. We do this video every day of the week, Monday through Friday, the Morning Pitt, a little bit of Pitt sports talk to get you ready for the day. Or whenever you watch this thing throughout the day, just to give you a little bit of Pitt sports talk to think about and consider some topics. Whatever is going on in the world of Pitt sports, we're talking about it right here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Of course, we also have our live stream, our live show, live Panther-Lair show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. We do live post-game shows after every road basketball game, so we'll have one tonight after the Pitt-Virginia game. We will be live probably around 9:15, somewhere around there. It will be live for 45 minutes or an hour or so of Pitt talk, so you can tune in right here to join that conversation. It's a lot of fun. It's like a call-in show, basically, with you joining the chat section, using your comments and questions in the chat screen. Right along the side there, you post all your comments and questions, and we talk about it and interact and react and share our thoughts about the game. That'll happen tonight right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you want to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you can turn on notifications and you'll get an alert every time we go live. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know the website, of course, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. All day, every day, Pitt fans are talking on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. All right, so this final stretch run, it starts for Pitt tonight, obviously with a huge game at Virginia. If they could win this one, it would be monumental for sure. Almost as big as the win at Duke. Maybe not quite as big, but it would be a big one, particularly since Virginia is undefeated at home this season. That's going to be a challenge for sure. The Cavaliers have been really good there. But there are other games to keep an eye on this week, because we're talking now not just about how Pitt stacks up in the ACC and what games will impact the Panthers' position in the conference, but we're also talking about resume and how to build resumes. And I think there's 2 big games for Pitt this week in terms of building the Panthers' resume and making some of their wins, already good wins, look better. And unfortunately, one of those games happened last night, and it was Wake Forest at Duke. And if Wake Forest could have won at Duke, like Pitt did, I think it would have been huge for the Panthers. Wake Forest currently, they entered the day top 40 in the net rankings. Duke, of course, top 20 in the net rankings. If you can go on the road and beat a top 20 team in the net rankings, that's going to help your net ranking. And Pitt, having beaten Wake Forest at home, could use Wake Forest's net ranking to go up as high as possible. You're really rooting for Wake Forest right now because you want them to win as many games as possible to help that ranking. And if they had defeated Duke, it would have boosted that game, gotten it closer to being a quad 1 victory. The Panthers obviously go to Wake Forest later on the schedule here, and they'll have an opportunity there for a good win. But that win at home would look even better if Wake Forest could have taken care of business against Duke last night. Unfortunately, the Demon Deacons unable to do so. They lost, it was the final 77-69. It's tough to win at Cameron, but Wake Forest really could have helped Pitt out. So that was one game you needed to be keeping an eye on. Didn't quite go the Panthers' way. The other big one this week, the one that we're keeping an eye on, and it's kind of down the road, but it's a game on Saturday. NC State is going to Clemson, and I think that's a huge game for Pitt on a lot of levels. Look, to a large extent, I think if you're Pitt, you want NC State to keep winning. I mean, right now that stands, I mean, obviously the Duke win is your biggest win, and you hope that over the next couple of weeks you're going to add some more big wins. But that NC State win, the thing with NC State right now is I think they're around like number 80 in the net rankings. You need them to climb back into the top 75, because if they climb back into the top 75, then that goes as a quad 1 win for Pitt, winning on the road. They're just outside. I think it's like 1 through 75. If you play a team ranked 1 through 75 on the road, it's a quad 1 game. And so, again, all of this stuff is not the be-all, end-all, but it looks much better to have them inside the top 75 so that win keeps counting for more and more. And NC State's got some opportunities here. They're going to Clemson this Saturday after a week off. They lost at Wake Forest on Saturday. They have a week off. They get their off week here, just like Pitt just had one. And then in March, like the first, that Saturday in March, they're at North Carolina, and they follow that up with a home game against Duke. And so NC State's got a couple of opportunities there to build up some good wins. Obviously, they finished the regular season at Pitt. You don't want them to win that game. But prior to that, at Clemson, at North Carolina, home against Duke, you want NC State to get a couple of those wins so they can climb up into that quad 1 region to make that road win look even better. And then ultimately, if they win a bunch of those games, then beating them at home can look better too. Potential quad 2 game there. Now you say, well, Pitt also has to go to Clemson. Don't you want them to look good? You do, but they're still inside the top 30 in the net rankings. Even if they lose to NC State at home, they're not going to, I don't think they'll drop to the point where, you don't want them to drop too far and become a quad 3 loss or something for that game at home. But they're not going to drop out of the top 75. So that game at Clemson, Pitt's game at Clemson, when is that? I forget, I had the date here. Pitt's game at Clemson on the 27th. So in a couple weeks, that's still going to be a quad 1 opportunity. What you need is NC State to win and build that back up so that it looks better on Pitt's resume. I mean, these are the kind of things you're thinking about. And so that's the other big one to watch for. I think you're rooting for NC State in that game on Saturday, because to some extent, like I said, you're thinking about ACC placement and whatnot. I think the biggest focus right now is improving the resume and making those wins look as good as possible and those losses look not as bad as possible, with more emphasis on making those wins look good. So 8 games left to play for Pitt, starting tonight. I mean, this really is, I feel like we've been saying stretch run for a few times, for a couple of weeks now. Oh, it's the final 12 games. It's the final 10 games. They've got 9 games left. What can they do over the final 9? Can they go 7-2? With the off week, with not having a game this past weekend, I feel like this really is the stretch run. And so we look at these 8 games, all right, that's left on Pitt's schedule as they look to finish out the 2023-24 regular season. They obviously start tonight at Virginia. They get Louisville at home on Saturday. They go to Wake Forest next Tuesday. Virginia Tech at home, then at Clemson, at Boston College, and then a pair of home games to close it out. Florida State on Tuesday, March 5th, NC State on Saturday, March 9th in the regular season finale. For some God knows why reason, the game at Wake Forest is a 9 o'clock game, and the game against Florida State at home is a 9 o'clock game. A couple of Tuesday night 9 o'clock games. Nobody likes that, but I digress. This really is the stretch run. These 8 games are the opportunity Pitt has to make its case for the NCAA tournament and try to play itself into the postseason. We'll talk about what kind of records you want to get in a second, because this is the big question. What does Pitt need to do in the final 8 games? I think when you look at those 8 games, you look at those 8 opponents, you can break them down into 3 categories. There's the must wins, the should wins, and then the hope to wins. I don't think there are any games on there that you would say are can't wins, largely because I don't think you have that can't win game on the schedule here, and also because the last time they had a can't-win game, it was the game at Duke, and they did win. So it's college basketball. You play 30-some games. Anybody can win on any night if it just happens to go that way. But there are games that I think you would put in the category of hope to win. Let's start with the must-win. And And I know our good friend Smenges is going to crack up about this one. Let me get my sheet here. And the must wins, because the last time we talked about a game being must win, it was the game against Syracuse at home that Pitt didn't win. And so I remember him sending a message, Smenges from the message board, who often or always has questions in the mailbag on Friday. So you've probably heard his username mentioned before. He sent me a message after that Syracuse game. So what happens after you lose the must-win game? Do you just stop playing games? It's a valid point. Calling a game a must-win is, it's a sports cliche. I think when we look at 3 games here on the schedule, you can't afford to lose these. In the big picture of trying to build that NCAA tournament resume, you can't afford to lose against Louisville at home. You can't afford to lose to Florida State at home. And I don't think you can afford to lose at Boston College. Even though it's a road game, I think you have to win those 3. I think some people would put the NC State game in there, the home game against NC State, as a must win, or the home game against NC State in the regular season finale as a must win. I guess so. I think it's going to be more challenging than that. You know what I mean? I don't put that in the same category as Louisville or Florida State. I've seen it suggested that, look, what Pitt has to do over these final 8 games is they have to win the 4 home games. So they got to beat Louisville and Florida State, and they got to beat Virginia Tech and NC State. I think Virginia Tech is going to be tougher than that I can't put them in that category just yet, of where it would be a terrible loss if they lose. It would be a resume-damaging loss if they lose to Virginia Tech or if they lose to NC State at home. But I think it's going to be more challenging that I can't put it in that category with Louisville and Florida State right now. NC State, kind of like the case that we've all made about Pitt's game at Syracuse. They blew it with missed free throws. Pitt held on to win that game in Raleigh. I don't know that NC State necessarily, to some extent, I think NC State sort of gave it away, partially with the missed free throws. It's not like Pitt made a lot of baskets down the stretch. They held on and won, and you're not going to take anything away from that. But NC State will look at that game as one that got away, just like I think if you're Pitt, you look at both Syracuse games really, but especially the one at the Dome as a game that got away, an opportunity that got away because you missed a bunch of free throws. You wasted an opportunity there. And so NC State looked at it that way, and that makes me feel nervous about that next game because what if they don't miss all of those free throws? Are you going to stop DJ Burns? You couldn't stop him the first time. I'm not sure if you'll stop him the second time. And are you going to be able to, if you can't rely on them missing free throws, can you make enough plays of your own to get that win in the regular season finale? So Louisville, Florida State, must win. At Boston College, must win. I think if you lose any one or more of those 3 games, I think you're kind of toast. I just think that's it. The should win category, I would put Virginia Tech here. The home game against Virginia Tech. I would put the NC State game here. I went back and forth about NC State between the should win and the must win. And maybe it's a moot distinction or it doesn't matter. It really just came down to how tough that game was. And I put the game at Wake Forest here. This is not, Wake Forest is not a game that I would point to and say that's a hope to win game. That's a game that you should win. You took care of business against Wake Forest at home. It wasn't necessarily easy, but you got it done. You had a big challenge with Efton Reed, but you found a way to handle that challenge. Now, maybe Efton Reed's going to go into that game in Winston-Salem and say, well, if you're going to put Will Jeffers on me again, I know how to handle him now, even though he already claimed that he handled it accordingly. So maybe if you're Pitt, you're hoping for Efton Reed to handle Will Jeffers' defense about as well as he did in the game in Pittsburgh. But I put that game in that category of the should win. I put Virginia Tech at home in the category of the should win and NC State at home in the category of should win. Now, obviously, that leaves 2 games for the hope to win. And they're 2 road games, and it starts with a game tonight at Virginia. Virginia is one of the hottest teams in the conference, maybe one of the hottest teams in college basketball. The Cavaliers are a perfect 13-0 at home. Incidentally, Wake Forest is as well. So that's something to keep an eye on as as move through the rest of the season here to see if both of those teams can stay perfect at home. Obviously, if you're a Pitt fan, you'd like to see Virginia's perfect streak at home come to an end tonight. That's going to be a really challenging game. It's going to be really tough. Virginia has won 8 in a row. They're 19-5 overall. They're 10-3 in the ACC. They're really breathing down North Carolina's neck, and they're emerging as one of the best teams in the conference again. And they are perfect at home. That's going to be the real challenge. Now, this Pitt team seems to thrive on road games and hostile environments, and they'll certainly be looking forward to it. Blake Hinson will be looking forward to it. He loves going into an opposing team's arena and draining threes. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a real challenge. And I think the game at Clemson will be a challenge as well. Now, Clemson has fallen on some hard times. They've had a rough go of things in ACC play, but after they opened conference play, I think 3-5, they've won 3 out of the last 4. They've won 2 in a row, and they're generally, I think they're still battling. I don't know where the latest bracketology has them, but I think they very much have a chance to make the NCAA. If we're talking about Pitt having a chance to make the NCAA tournament, then I think we would say Clemson has a chance to make the NCAA tournament, and maybe more than a chance. But I think that's going to be a really challenging game. So I look at those 2 games, Virginia and Clemson, on the road being in the hope to win category. Now, the number everybody keeps coming back to, the number everybody talks about with 8 games is winning 6, going 6-2. Now, if you can go 6-2, that means you win one of those 3 road games, at least one of those 3 road games, Wake Forest, Virginia, Clemson, which is good. I think any one of those 3 would count as a quad 1 win. So that's a good resume building win, 6-2. But it means you're also losing, maybe your 2 losses. If it comes down to it, that Wake Forest, Virginia, Clemson, those 3 games on the road, you go 1-2 in those 3 games. That means you take care of business in the 4 home games, Louisville, Florida State, Virginia Tech, NC State. That means you also win at Boston College, and you get a quality win out of those 3. That's pretty good. That, I don't want to say would be the best case outcome. I don't want to put a ceiling on it or a limit or whatever. But that's about, of realistic, plausible outcomes, I would put that at probably the top of the best case scenario, the best possible outcome, the best plausible outcome for this team over the final 8 games. And if they go 6-2, you're looking at being 21-10 overall, 12-8 in the ACC. Presumably, I mean, you're at least 1 bye. I think things would have to shake out a certain way for you to get a double bye. Although, to be honest, if I'm Pitt, I probably only want 1 bye. You know what I mean? I want as many games as I can play in the ACC tournament. I don't want to end up having to play every day. I would like at least 1 bye because I don't want to finish in the bottom 4 or whatever it is. But I would want to be in a position where I can get 1 bye, but only 1 bye, because I want to play against a lower seeded team and have an opportunity to maybe add 2 wins in the ACC tournament. And I think if you end up with a double bye, now you're looking at some really challenging situations to get 2 wins and improve to where you would finish 23-11 at that point. If you could win 2 games and then lose in the ACC tournament, you end up at 23-11. And now I think you've really made a case for yourself. Under this whole scenario we're playing out of going 6-2 in the final 8, provided you go 1-2 in these 3 crucial road games, Wake Forest, Virginia, Clemson. There are 2 questions with that, though, of this 6-2 finish and playing out the way that we're describing it. One, does it get them into the NCAA tournament? I don't know. I can't predict that. There's so many factors that go into it. There's so many factors that have already been written and so many that have not been written that I don't know. I don't know if that gets them in. But the second question I think we can answer a little bit more comfortably. Would that count as a good season? If they go 6-2 in these final 8 and finish the regular season 21-10, win 1 or 2 games in the ACC tournament, so they either finish 22-11 or 23-11, would that count as a good season, regardless of outcome in the NCAA tournament, of whether or not they make the NCAA tournament? Now, obviously, if that whole scenario plays out and they make the NCAA tournament, then you're going to say, yes, that's a good season. If that scenario plays out exactly that way and they don't make the NCAA tournament, I think it would make it disappointing, but I would still say that it was a good season. If you're able to stack up 21, 22, 23 wins, regular season and ACC tournament combined, I would say that's a good season. Not without its disappointments and regrets. The chief among those being the Missouri game and the 2 Syracuse games. And I said this on Twitter yesterday and on the message boards that I think those 3 games, the Missouri game and the 2 Syracuse games, will be the ones that we look back on and say, boy, those were the games that got away. They could have taken care of business in those games. Boy, imagine what position they would be in right now. And good friend Thunder Pit Road on Twitter said, the Duke game helped make up for some of those losses, or at least one of those bad losses or disappointing losses in Missouri and the 2 Syracuse games. And that's true, it did. But the unfortunate thing is that because of those losses, the Duke game, it like lessened the positive impact of the Duke game. If you win those 3 games and then you win that Duke game, boy, howdy, you're almost a lock for the ACC or for the NCAA tournament. Instead of having such a slim margin for error heading into this final stretch run of 8 games. Even if they miss it, but they go 6-2 down the stretch here, I think it will be a good season. A disappointing one, but a good one. And I think if they give themselves, if they go 6-2 down the stretch here, they're going to give themselves a chance to make the NCAA tournament. I think they'll be in that conversation, in that bubble conversation, and some of it might come down to what other teams do, where their fate will be out of their hands, short of winning the ACC tournament, of course. So it'll be interesting. One other note, 5 out of Pitt's final 8 games are against teams that are currently higher in the ACC standings than they are. Thought that was interesting. Could make things very interesting going down the stretch. All right, that's it. Pitt, Virginia tonight. We'll be live after the game for the post-game show. So make sure you tune in for that. We'll probably start around 9:15 or something like that. Looking forward to it as always. So thanks for checking in today. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and then come hang out in a few hours, depending on what time you watch us. Come hang out in like 12 hours, and we will talk about Pitt, Virginia after the game right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So thanks again. Like the video, subscribe. Hope you had a great Monday. Hope you have a great Tuesday. We'll talk to you after the game tonight right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.